computer so that I've got the audio, so I don't have to go through Zoom to download the audio, because let me tell you, doing that stuff on my work account is a pain in the posterior. All right, so welcome to Medicine, Physics, and Surgery in the Late Middle Ages. My name is Eric von Kleinfeld, and this is a sort of a truncated 1 hour version of my 2 hour Physick class. And hopefully I won't get too gruesome. I've never had anybody faint in my Physick class. I have at Jamestown, but I'll try not to get too gruesome with my descriptions of surgeries and things. Okay, so this is not an exhaustive treatise. What I'm hoping to do is inspire you to jump on your Googles and your Wikipedias and the National Library of Medicine to go and look up in depth all the stuff that I'm going to cover in a cursory glance fashion. Um, so my major focus, once I get through the background and history, is going to be 15th and 16th centuries. Um, let's see. Backgrounds. Let's start with ancient stuff. There is it, a lot of times you'll see the modern people portraying medieval and earlier medicine as basically as doctors, physicians, surgeons, etc., as being basically a bunch of illiterate butchers, and nothing could be further than the truth. And medical knowledge tends to come and go. You'll see people learning things and forgetting them, and then stuff gets rediscovered and so forth. Um, oh yes, Min, absolutely put that in chat if you would please. Um, so anyway, so for example, they have found Egyptian and earlier mummies and bodies and so forth that had splinting, splinted fractures, including some splinted fractures of the femur, which are pretty close to really rough doing in the 21st century. Um, I've actually had wilderness first aid, and I got to play the dummy for an advanced that was resorting. So I got to be the dummy for a traction splint. And I tell you what, I don't want to break my own femur. Um, and then another thing you'll hear is things about, oh, they cut holes in people's head to let the demons out. No. Um, Anybody who's doing a craniotomy knows bloody good and well that what they're doing is relieving the pressure from a concussion or something. And you will see prehistoric Neolithic period skulls. You'll see Mesoamerican civilizations, Mayans, Incans, Aztecs, Greek, Roman. You'll see evidence of craniotomy in all of those. Um, and then hands up, anybody who's heard of Otzi, the Iceman? The guy that got himself freeze dried in a glacier 6,000 years ago. Interesting things. They found some fungi in his gear that basically serve as an antibiotic. It's an antibiotic fungus. They found some other medicinal plants in his gear. They also found some bracken fern in his stomach, and that might have been taken as a helminthicide. The really interesting thing, and I'm going to share this just for grins. Share screen. This one, share, and where's Oatsy? Oatsy. No, that's Woodall. There we go. Oh, quit pulling down, you stupid Zoom thing. Wound man, is that Oatsy? No. Oatsy. Dang it, did I lose him? Oh no, there he is. Boom. Now, if you'll notice here, Oatsy, that's where all the tattoos are labeled. And he had a whole bunch of dots and crosses and stripes and things tattooed on his skin. And people were going, what the heck are those? And then an Asian medical specialist said, those are either on or right next to acupuncture meridians. So you've got some Chalcolithic period healer back in the day, um, in the Alps, figured out you poke somebody here and it stops hurting there. And of course, since it was a pre-literate culture, you're talking about oral traditions, and sooner or later, somebody who knows all the stories dies, and it passes away until later on when the Chinese figure it out and they actually document it. So you'll see a lot of stuff coming and going over history and prehistory. Um, Going up to, and I'm going to go ahead to my. Uh, let me and see, this is what happens when I'm ADHDing between two machines. I've got my handout and outline on one. Handouts and slides. My website is 3fgburner.net, and I've got that. And I would avoid my rants and writings page unless you're into really bizarre thoughts. Or, but I've also got a bunch of crockpot recipes and whatnot. We've figured out that we are recording the class. Any questions, feel free to put them in chat. Um, yes, Siobhan, yes, see my website. Yeah, oh, yeah, Nessa, the bracken in his stomach would have been taken as a helminthicide. One of his tattoos was an acupuncture point for abdominal issues, and they found intestinal parasites. Um, and like I said, this is a quickie compared to my Pennsic one. Um, and I'll just leave that there for the moment. And we'll talk about um, getting into the background. Mesopotamian civilizations, you're talking about a lot of religious thought in your medical practice. Um, Throughout prehistory and history, people had a pretty good handle on treating physical injuries. But then diseases, because you don't have microscopes and such, like germ theories, are a bit out. So you're going to have people who uh, basically think that if somebody has honked off the gods. So a given disease would have been you had committed a specific sin to get the gods mad at you, and then you had to propitiate the gods and make confession and make amends and so forth. And sometimes they could do everything for you they could, except that some god wouldn't accept the apology, and you were dead anyway. Um, they did have a couple of in the Mesopotamian civilizations. They had a couple of different kinds of physicians. Ah, oh yes, exactly. Catherine, catch Catherine's comment in the chat there. Um, And yes, anybody who wants to pitch in on the discussion, feel free to chime in the chat, because I'm going to save the chat and read it for my own edification afterward. Um, and so you'd have spiritual doctors, and you would have herbs and incantations. Yes, the other type would be the empirical ones, who who would use herbs and other medicines instead of just propitiating the gods. Excellent point. Um, and you would have surgeons coming in to treat physical injuries from both directions, from the spiritual and the empirical ones. Um, Egyptians, again, you've got a lot of magical thinking about diseases and priestly functions for disease, but then you're also seeing things like setting and splinting fractures. You're seeing, craniotomy for concussions. Uh, you're seeing various things. Plus, your typical Egyptian healer and/or priest would have a pretty good knowledge of anatomy because of their dealing with dead bodies. So we get up into the classical age in Greece, and where uh, where the Mycenaean period Greeks, 1500, 2000 BCE, the Mycenaeans would be thinking, Homer would be talking about um, when plague hit the siege lines around Troy, that they were smitten by Apollo with his arrows. Um, Fast forward into the classic period, and they're focusing on thinking rationally about the world and things in it and diseases. And I, one of the things I'm going to sort of touch on briefly in this is, the names that stick out. People like Hippocrates. Um, you know, Hippocrates did not claim to be the end all and be all. He said, start here and carry on. But he was doing things like, for example, he came up with the humoral theory, the four bodily humors, which stick around all the way up into the late 16, early 1700s. And humoral theory is that if you have these four fluids in your bodies and they get out of balance, then you get sick. So you have blood, which is warm and wet, phlegm, which is cold and wet, black bile or melancholy, which is cold and dry, and choler or yellow bile, which is hot and dry. So if you have an excess of choler, you would be running a fever. Likewise, if you've got a fever, you might have too much blood, particularly if you're hot and red and flushed. So if they take some blood, of course, your body is going to react by going into, any guesses? Yes, shock. Cold, pale, clammy, we fixed your fever. So they don't do it for they don't do it for 2 millennia, because they're dumb. They do it because by the medical theory they know it works. Um, Hippocrates would also do things like urinalysis, look at, examine, taste urine, and the diabetes is Greek for sweet waters. Diabetes mellitus would be adding the Latin honey to the end. And he did, in fact, and Hippocrates did sort of figure out that if you put somebody on the ancient Greek or classic Greek equivalent of a low carb diet, you might be able to buy them some time. Let's see what else we got in the chat. And yeah, got it. Oh, yes. Um, would lowering iron starve a germ? Probably not. What you're talking about there is simply the physical effect of dropping blood pressure. Um, anyway, um, so you also start seeing herbal remedies discussed, and yes, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. I didn't know that one. See, that's what I like about. That's what I love about this class is I learn something new every day. Um, And I was at Physick one time. I had just taught this class, and I had my period kit over in the first aid station. This is back when we still had chirurgeons pulling shifts along with the docs. And one of the docs mentioned ants. And I looked it up, and it turns out that 9th and 10th century physicians in India would pour a urine sample out near an ant hill. And if the ants went for the urine sample, then you knew the patient had the sugar disease. So you're using ants as basically six-legged test strips, which saves wear and tear on your apprentice's taste buds. Um, and I would guess that the flies around the shoes might be because you're getting circulatory problems and then necrosis in the extremities. And oh yes, oh yeah, definitely hanging on to that one. Thank you, Min. Um, So Dioscorides starts in on the accumulating of herbal knowledge, and you'll see um, up there in the 1600s, Nicholas Culpeper in his herbal. Um, by the late 1500s, the College of Physicians in London had a dispensatorium Londinensis in Latin, and then Culpeper, being an Oxford, a Latin-speaking Oxford dropout who'd apprenticed as an apothecary, decided to be a smart aleck and translate the thing into English. Which meant, of course, that the apothecaries didn't have to pay the physicians to translate their prescriptions, which he gets into a lot. But he actually cites Dioscorides, for example, in the use of willow bark for fevers. Um, Fast forward into Rome, you have Galen doing anatomical studies on animals because it was illegal to chop up human cadavers in Rome. And again, uh, Galen, Galen said, yes, I know animals are different from humans, but this is what I could work with. When you see the innards of a wounded human, I'll get, my stuff can give you an idea, but then do your own research. The problem is that by the time you filter it through the Dark Ages, the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, what comes out the other side is, Galen said it, I believe that settles it. So by the end of our period in England, for example, your admission exam to the College of Physicians is a 4-hour oral exam in Latin where you just regurgitate Galen quotes. We get up into post Hajj. One of the interesting things, or one of the cool things about Islam, is their immense value on written knowledge. And instead of burning libraries, they would grab the contents. If they conquered someplace, instead of burning the libraries, they would learn from them. So you have Arabic medicine progressing itself and preserving Greco-Roman stuff. So we get up into, by the 1400s. Now I get to show, let me whip up my slides here. Share screen, slides, share. And I'm going to windowify that and pull it down a bit so that, okay, you should specifically be seeing my slide PDF as opposed to the rest of my screen. There we go. So by the Middle Ages, you've got 3 branches. You've got your physicians, your surgeons, and your apothecaries are your 3 main branches. And then as well, you'll have your village herbalists, your grandma and her patch of herbs. You do have in some places where the men haven't totally horned in on it, midwives and female physicians practicing. I took a really good class in June on women physicians in the Middle Ages. The split between physicians and surgeons came about in the mid-1200s. The church had kind of a monopoly on medicine, mainly because they had a near monopoly on literacy. And they got it into their heads that cutting people open was bad for their spiritual condition. So they said, all right, barbers do sharp stuff. We'll farm that out to the barbers. And so your medieval barber surgeon, you'll note there on my front and center on my surgeon's table there, I've got a right by the Fleeman bleeding bowl. And then right back behind there, I've got a barber's bowl. And I've got a razor and scissors and a sponge and so forth, because in fact I would be cutting hair, shaving, and also pulling teeth, bleeding fevers, purging tummy aches and whatnot. So the surgeon becomes the guy you go to for physical fixes. The apothecary is where the doctor will send you for diagnosis, examination, diagnosis, and whatnot. So your doctor is a university-trained gentleman. He'll talk to you about your He'll talk to you about your diet and potty habits, poke and prod, where does it hurt, check your pulse, check for fever. But he's not going to actually get down and get into your guts and stuff. He's going to send you to an apothecary for medicines or to a surgeon for treatments. Surgeons and apothecaries would start out as teenagers, sweeping the barber shop or weeding the herb garden, and they're learning hands-on by watching their masters and watching their masters helping out, and eventually by their early 20s or so, standing for a hands-on practical exam, and then becoming journeyman apothecaries and surgeons. Diagnosis, as I was saying, you'll notice here on this, you guys are seeing the slides, right? Yes. Okay. You'll notice here that I've got a lovely little diagram called a urine wheel. And so um, I did actually get a uroscopy flask. If we look back at my table here, you can see the Jordan flask or uroscopy flask sitting right beside my barber's bowl. And again, they're mostly theoretical, and most of what they're doing is going by Galen, Dioscorides, and some of the ancients. When you go to a university, I've got a slide here of a university anatomy theater. And this is an sort of an abstract picture of the theater at the University of Padua. So you've got your lower class med students sitting up in the nosebleed seats, and then the upperclassmen down below. The professor is at a podium reading from Galen, and the dissection's being done by an apprentice barber surgeon. So out of all those people, let's think who is getting the most benefit, who's learning the most about that. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat here, or can I see the chat? Show grid, chat. Oh, it's still. I will go back to column. But yeah, so that teenage apprentice barber surgeon is actually learning the most about what's up inside that person's innards. Now, getting up into the mid 1500s, we have Andreas Vesalius, who's actually Dutch, but when these guys got famous, they hooked themselves up with a Latin handle, to make themselves look cooler. And when he was sitting there I believe he's going to med school in Paris, and he was actually paying attention to the dissection and was noticing that I'm not seeing what the professor's describing because the professor's reading from Galen's animal dissections. And he went on to become a fairly famous physician. As a matter of fact, he became the court physician to the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. And he wound up eventually publishing his own anatomy. He did his own dissections, got engravers to do his woodcuts and so forth. And he had the clout to publish without totally ruining his career. He did at one point get called a Lutheran of anatomy, which is amusing because the person who called him that was a Catholic and a Galenist, so this was not a compliment. Ambroise Paré, and it's interesting because Paré was French and participated in dozens of military campaigns over the years. What I've got there is the cover photo of Les œuvres d'Ambroise Paré, conseiller et chirurgien, etc. And I've got his complete works on a CD, and it's pretty close to half a gig of stuff on that CD. Um, but a couple of Paris war stories at the siege of Turin, he was basically up to his ears in gunshot patients. Um, and what had happened was in the late 1400s, an Italian physician or surgeon named Giovanni da Vigo noticed that gunshot wounds always festered, and that's because a round musket ball, where a modern bullet will kind of drill a hole through, a round musket ball will poke and it will drag all that dirty clothing that the guy hasn't changed out of in a month into the wound. So your gunshot wounds are likely to fester. And what De Vigo said was that they were poisoned by the gunpowder and they had to be cauterized with boiling oil. And then you applied a digestive of egg whites, honey, egg whites, turpentine, and oil of roses afterward. Um, and Paré had so many gunshot patients, he ran out of boiling oil, so he just poured in this gunshot ointment afterward, or without the boiling oil, and spent a sleepless night. Figured he'd killed half his patients, and then the next day went in, and the people who had not had the third degree burn added to their bullet holes were doing better than the ones who had. Funny thing that. And so he decided that he was no longer going to torture people. So amputations. Whipping back to my surgeon's table here. You'll notice I've got a bunch of knives off to my by my right hand. I've got that big curved capital knife. Let me pull up my Woodall diagram. You'll see the capital knife. Oh, right there, sort of in the middle of the bone saw there. So you take your capital knife. First, you give them a snort or two of laudanum. Basically, get them high enough that they don't care that you're cutting into them. Oh well, man, that hurts. You can't knock them out because out and dead are a little bit too close together. But then you would slap on a tourniquet and give them a stick to bite on. And then you would take the capital knife, this big curved sucker here, and you would take that and cut down to the bone with a couple of cuts. By the mid 1500s, you would be using a slanted cut to put the stitches on the side. Then you would take your incision knife, which is over under the limb of the bone saw here, the short one, and you would cut loose the ligaments and tendons and so forth. You would retract the the flesh so that you're exposing about an inch or so of bone. That way, you're not trying to stretch the stump over the end of a long bone. You're cutting the flesh here and the bone here, so that you've got a pocket to make the stump. You cut that, retract, and then before you loosen that tourniquet, you've got to do something about them bleeding to death. Up at the top left here, you've got a curved piece with a ball on the end. That's a cautery. You could cauterize with a red hot iron, or you could grab the artery with a forceps, pull it out of the flesh a little bit, and then have some lengths of suturing cord on the forceps jaws and just slide one down over the artery and tie it off, so that you're tying it off instead of cauterizing. And that's if you've got the time and resources to do that, that's a kinder, gentler way to close the blood vessels and keep them from bleeding to death. And this is a technique that was used in Greek and Roman times, and then Monsieur Paré resurrected that technique, and it had still been used in some minor surgeries, but Paré resurrected it as a technique in amputations, and got a bunch of grief from his colleagues for dissing the ancients. And he's going, "Hey, my ancients are older than your ancients." his apology and treatise is great. His apology and treatise is about 50% medical stuff, and then the other 50% is snark. Um, so your apothecaries are over the centuries are learning. You'll see Greeks and Romans talking about things like Hippocrates talking about opium gum and wine as an anesthetic. You'll see Dioscorides talking about willow bark. So a lot of your herbal medicines and so forth are are actually effective. You've got this sort of trial and error over millennia leading to some actual working good treatments, and then you have some stuff that people think of that's pretty much voodoo, and we'll talk about that in a bit um, when we get to there. Okay, so we will talk about some of the junk on my surgeon's table, and I'm gonna jump real quick to here. We have a wound man. This is the sort of gory stuff that you're going to have to deal with occasionally as a military surgeon. Fortunately, as an SCA chirurgeon, I don't have to deal with much worse than armor bites and boo-boo feet most of the time. But you'll notice the text around this one, and again, this is a snatch from the Welcome Library, which Welcome with two L's. You can Google it. Right now, their site is down for security upgrades, but they will open shortly, and they have tons and tons and tons of free historic art that you can pick up. And you'll notice the text around here. In a lot of surgical texts, the a lot of surgical texts, the wound man serves as it's the first illustration. It serves as the table of contents. You know, turn to this page to fix this problem. Like that crossbow quarrel through the femoral artery, or those interesting carbuncles and sores and whatnot around the groin area and so forth. That one later on, by the 1600s, there's an old surgeon's joke about you've had one night with Venus and then now you get life with Mercury. Um, and then, of course, I've got, if I need close-ups, here is an example, and this again, Woodall is about 17. Woodall actually published 17 years out of period, but he was practicing in the late 1500s. He just didn't publish until after the SCA period. But yeah, so we're talking about using trephination again to relieve pressure from concussions. Um, in the mid 1500s, Henry II of France, Paré by that time was his court surgeon. Henri got a lance in the face, and a lance fragment actually came through his eye slot, went into his eye, went through his head, and came out his ear. So he had this huge splinter. That that did not actually kill him. They managed to get the splinter out of his brain, but he eventually died. And Vesalius actually came up from Spain and worked with Paré trying to save him. But when he died, they did an extremely rare autopsy on a dead king, and what they found was an example of what's now called a counter-coup concussion. That is to say, the lance hit him in the head, his head ricocheted back, and his brain bounced off the back of his skull. So he had the concussion and subdural hematoma back here on the opposite side from where he got hit. And of course, because they didn't realize that it was all the way around back there, they didn't know to trephine him for that concussion. So on the surgeon's table, I am I'm a military surgeon. That means that I may very well not be able to send somebody down the street to an apothecary, because the apothecary could be on the other side of enemy lines, or I could be off in foreign lands and the nearest apothecary is several hundred miles away or what have you. So I'm not going to carry a whole drugstore worth of stuff. What I'm going to be carrying is mostly things that are useful to me as a surgeon. So a lot of these tall bottles at the back are aimed at dressing wounds. I've got a bottle of Perret's gunshot ointment. I've got turpentine. I've got vinegar. I have aqua vitae. Anybody want to guess what aqua vitae is? Whiskey. Basically, they took aqua vitae, Latin for water of life, and then in Gaelic it's Wishkabaha, and then in English they abbreviated it to whiskey. And this is not an anesthetic. If you get somebody drunk enough to pass out, you've given them alcohol poisoning. If they're not passed out, then you have just gotten somebody drunk and stuck a knife in them, and you are now dealing with a mean drunk who is trying to beat you up while he's bleeding to death, because it's also a vasodilator and an anticoagulant. So um, what I have down in here is a carefully faked bottle of laudanum, since I don't want the DEA on my case for the real thing. And then my bottle of mercury is actually a bottle of silver paint pretending to be mercury. The rest of this stuff is real and works. I have, for example, comfrey. Comfrey contains a chemical called allantoin, which promotes cell growth and healing. And as a matter of fact, the old Johnson and Johnson first aid cream had allantoin as an active ingredient. Um, I've got sulfur and olive oil for making itch cream. It will give you some topical relief from the itch, and it will chase away the bugs that are biting you. I have rose hips for scurvy. The dispensatorium says that roses are good for looseness of teeth, bleeding gums, running sores of the skin, and blurring vision, which Woodall later on names as scurvy. And now we know that rose hips have more vitamin C per gram than oranges do. Um, I have chamomile for upset tummies. I've got St. John's wort. Now that one's interesting because in the mainstream surgical application is as a poultice for punctures, and it does work for that. It helps with them. But your little grandmas off in the woods in English folk medicine are using a St. John's wort tea as a treatment for an excess of melancholy. In other words, what you've basically got is 16th century Prozac. Let's see, where am I? Roses. I've got chamomile for upset tummies. Um, Now, the Spanish by the late 1500s have figured out that cinchona bark or quinine is good for anti-malarial remedy, as an anti-malarial remedy. The Brits don't get their hands on it until after our period, about the 1640s. Um, going across to the going across some of the other stuff. I've Because of course this is late 1500s and they've discovered the New World. They haven't gotten the really nice Caribbean tobacco yet, but they've got some fairly nasty Native American stuff. And remember, I was talking about your bodily humors. You've got your blood, your phlegm, your etc. Phlegm is cold and moist, and tobacco is a hot, dry herb. So if I load up a pipe with that tobacco, and then I suck that smoke deeply into my lungs, I will purge the phlegm outward by coughing. So it's a thing called treating by antipathy. Um, and you can also use tobacco as a poultice on green wounds or on bee stings. You can swallow, if you have an upset stomach, you can swallow tobacco juice and it will have no more upset. That's an example of treating by sympathy. In other words, you're feeling your stomach's upset, you need to barf, do some tobacco juice, you'll barf, and that handles the problem. Another example, one of the things that's sitting somewhere toward the back of my table, I have a bottle of tincture of wormwood. And don't ask me why, but I actually did find some real wormwood in the Mexican urban spice section of an ethnic grocery store once. So I grabbed it and steeped it in alcohol and made a tincture. So if you were to chug that small bottle of wormwood that I had, you'd better be within 10 feet of a bathroom, because it will take care of your intestinal parasites, but you'll also be relieved of everything you've eaten for the past couple of weeks. Um, and now, if you're out of tincture of wormwood, you'll notice I have a couple of rather large clyster syringes there. You can take your wormwood and some hot water and vinegar, or sorry, tobacco juice, hot water and vinegar, administer it per fundament, shall we say, and that will, in fact, kill your tapeworms and things. It will also probably give you a heck of a nicotine buzz because, of course, the fundament is the back door to the bloodstream. Anything you administer there, you will get a higher effect for a lower dose. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to, when I go on a voyage or a campaign, I'm going to go to the apothecary and say, I need things for these diseases, sell me what I need, and while you're at it, tell me how to use them. So I've got a mortar and pestle for grinding up. Oh, say I need some mustard, I need some powdered mustard for a mustard plaster, so I'll grind it up. Again, I can grind up cloves and pack them into a cavity for toothache. Um, I can grind up some alum and put it in a cut to stop bleeding. I've also got in a box back there behind my stuff, I've got a big alum crystal about yo big that's a styptic crystal. And yes, I have actually used some of this stuff to treat real injuries. Then I have a set of dental forceps, so I can pull teeth. I've got a goat's foot pry tool for getting bit, because of course somebody's not going to go to the surgeon to get a tooth pulled until it's almost a lost cause. So that surgeon is going to grab a hold of it. It may break, so you're going to need the goat's foot to dig the root bits out. I've also got a ball forceps. So, right next to my nice big curved capital knife, I've got a bullet probe, so I can poke around. I can poke down in the hole, find out how deep the bullet is, and measure it. And then I know how deep to go in with a ball forceps. I go in, I grab the bullet, and get it out. Master Woodall also has, if we look right, top left corner, you've got that retractor, then you've got the cautery, and then you've got a thing that looks like a cross between a syringe and a corkscrew. That's a terebellum. That would be a screw that you drive into the ball to drag it out of a bone. And then we'll refrain from the various anal and other specula. This is an overview. Then I've got a brace and bit there, which would be, and you'll notice it's got a hole saw. So we're looking at, again, with Woodall, over to the right there, to the right of the bone saw, and above and to the right of the mallet and bone chisel. He's got a brace and bit type treffin, which is another way of drilling holes in skulls. Back to my table. Then I've got cauteries, incision and capital knives and so forth, and then of course my bone saw, and then in the middle there I've got a bite stick so you can chomp on it. A friend of mine who's a barber surgeon at Jamestown, one of his colleagues' wife is allergic to the painkillers used in childbirth, so she asked Terry to make him a bite stick. And since both she and Terry had both Celtic and Native American roots, he laminated this bite stick out of 2 or 3 sacred woods of the Druids, wrapped it in leather, and then decorated it with some Native American charms so that she had something to chomp on while she was having the kid. Anyway, So it is about 10 till. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and look at the chat here. And aim while urinating, link to Google Drive. Boiled horsehair. Hannah, the horsehair thing I believe is 18th century. When I had, if I could get it, I'd be using silk. Otherwise I'd use linen or whatever I could get my hands on. Um, yeah. Cecilia, one of my friends is an emergency doc in is oh an emergency doc in Missouri, and for the Jamestown 2007, he brought a historically accurate replica of a Woodall surgeon's chest, and he said that there's been times when he wished there was. Okay, the Caroline. So the crystal, if you've ever heard of an old critter called a styptic pencil that lives in medicine cabinets, um, the original safety razors, safety in air quotes, the double edged safety razor would still cut the dickens out of you while shaving, and you would have a styptic pencil was basically powdered alum made into a chalk stick, and you rub it on the shaving cut, and it stings like crazy, but it will clot the blood. And so I could pack some powdered alum into a wound to encourage clotting, basically medieval quick clot. Um, I also, again, in that urban spice section of the ethnic grocery, I found a big bag of Pietro dell'Ombre, and I actually found an alum crystal about that big. And war story time. My capital knife actually has notches in the handle from where I've treated real injuries with it, real injuries with this kit. And one guy at the Virginia Ren Fair was putting up a tent. A tent pole slipped out of its socket, and Harry Pottered him in the forehead. And I said, hang on, I got a first aid kit. So I took him over by the military guild, and I'm reaching for my modern bag with the gauze and antibiotics. He goes, nah, treat me with this stuff, right? So I grabbed my sea sponge and I soaked it in aquavitae and scrubbed the cut out with whiskey. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Um, Whenever I've got kids around the table and they start playing with the knives, I tell them if they cut themselves, I use the stingy stuff to fix them, um, and let them sniff my turpentine bottle. Um, and then he goes, "You got anything that'll stop bleeding?" Because I got this white doublet on. So I handed him the styptic crystal. I'm smelling the testosterone poisoning as he's like sitting there in agony, proving he's a tough guy by rubbing this thing over his laceration until the blood pickles and clots. But it worked, you know. And he didn't get infected because I scrubbed out the wound with alcohol first. Incidentally, the sea sponge, every once in a while I'll have some kid ask me, "What's that?" And I tell them it's a dead SpongeBob. And of course, the 4-year-olds are all and the 10-year-olds are all chuckling evilly. Yeah. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. Thank you, Nessa. I am absolutely stealing that. Um, yeah, Siobhan, a lot of times veterinarians will recommend styptic pencils for if you're trimming your cat's claws and you over trim and you get bleeding, which really pisses off the cat. Let me tell you. Um, okay, tincture, chamomile, and yarrow. Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. Absolutely. You totally reminded me. One of the bottles on my table there is yarrow. It is a mild analgesic. It is it's a mild analgesic. It's antibacterial, and it's a bit of a coagulant. And um, yeah, exactly. Oh, styptic powder. Yeah, Oh, that would get you a really annoyed dog, or well, no, cats are the ones that really growl if you do that to them. Um, okay, um, we are right getting up close to the end of things. Anybody want to unmute theirself and shoot the breeze?
So how long did it take you to put all that equipment together for your table?
Okay, I started out around 2005, oh 06 thereabouts. Um, and I just picked up a couple of things. There's a special on the Geographic that was shot at Henricus, which is it's a recreation of the first English hospital in the New World. And they were shooting a movie called Nightmare in Jamestown about the horrible ways they found to die. And I had brought down like the beginnings of my kit. I had like a small syringe, and I had my Fleeman bleeding bowl, and one, bleeding stick, and a couple of other things, and that was about all I had. It fit the whole thing fit in a haversack. Um, but I had that along with me just because I was going to a hospital, and they just totally and the Geographic film crew just they had no idea about the medical stuff, and they just totally had me ad lib a couple scenes, where I was sponging a guy's fevered brow with my sponge and bleeding him. They had me going at his arm with the bleeding with the phleem, the bleeding knife, and then holding my bleeding bowl, and then some intern off camera was pouring movie blood into my bleeding bowl from a drip bottle. And so all the medical stuff in that Geographic special um, is totally ad libbed. But and then hopping on eBay, I go, oh look, I can go on eBay and I can find syringes and you know pretty much anywhere you can find mortars and pestles. I think both my dark brown mortar and pestle and the light brown one that I'm using for a stand for my that I'm using as a stand for my uroscopy flask. By the way, that was not pee. That was non-alcoholic beer. Freaked out the visitors when I drank it at the end too. Um, the small green blown apothecary bottles are from the Jamestown glass blower. Um, the um, the bone saw and the brace are flea market finds. They're actually 19th century. And the two pewter clyster syringes are actually the most antique things I've got, because almost pretty much nobody makes repro syringes like that. So those are about 200 years old, but the design stabilized around 1450. So um, and then a lot of the factory made stuff, the capital knife, the ball forceps, and so forth. There is a place, G. Gedney Godwin in Pennsylvania, gggodwin.com. And oh yes, the finger dip. Um, yep, yep. A test of observation. And yes, and um, so the fun part is that you'll see the Godwin instruments like that ball forceps and the bullet probe and the capital knife on everybody from the 1500s to the 1800s. As a matter of fact, anybody see Master and Commander?
Long time ago.
Okay, so Dr. Maturin's instruments, his whole set was Godwin's,
Hmm.
including the treffin that he used on the guy's skull. Actually, that's one of my favorite lines is them his brains, doctor? No, that's dried blood. Scoop, 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 splat. That's his brains. Wonderful stuff. Okay, uh, those of you who have classes to get to, thank you for attending. absolutely, absolutely loved having you. And anybody wants to stick around and shoot the breeze, well, I got a ways to go before I have to cook dinner. So,
Well, how do you cure shooting the breeze?
actually, if we want, if I'm gonna get totally hideous here. This is totally 18th and 19th century. This is late 18th, early 19th century. But you want to talk shooting the breeze? Guess what that is?
Oh, I bet that goes up someone's butt.
It does. You've
Yeah,
heard the phrase.
that's a
You've heard the phrase "blowing smoke up your ass." It's not just an expression. And what was really bad is, so you had a Victorian condition, the vapors, and what it actually was fainting due to corset-induced hypoxia. But they would figure that if somebody fainted with the vapors, then a dose of smoke would wake them up, which I imagine it probably did. They also tried to use it as a resurrection for drowning, which didn't work so well. But yeah, shooting the breeze can be literal.
So your story about going to that hospital reminds me. So when I went to England, the only thing I wanted to do was go see the John Snow pump, and they no longer have it.
Hmm.
It was torn down.
Oh
And
man.
so I go into the John Snow pub right next to it and
Hmm.
sign their little thing, and every single person in there is an epidemiologist. Every single one. They're all like, "Where's the pump? Pump. We all want to see the pump." And I'm like, why would they take down this historic monument to science for a
Yeah.
new road?
Ah. No, that's like, yeah. One of the, oh, I absolutely totally forgot to. I want to put this in the chat real quick. Um, nlm.nih.gov. Oh, National Library of Medicine of NIH. They have everything. Um, I've found stuff like, for example, the original versions of the Paré story I'd heard was that Paré made up this digestive of egg whites and turpentine and oil of roses himself, but that was actually what De Vigo was using after he boiled them out. Um, so on the one hand, he was rejecting one of De Vigo's treatments and using the other. Another thing I found on the NIH site was variolation for smallpox. You have among the cattle raising tribes in Africa, you have people intentionally infecting people with cowpox as early as the 1500s, and then um, nasal nasal administration of powdered attenuated smallpox scabs starts in that general area and in the Middle East and goes eastward to India and China by the 1700s. So Edward Jenner gets a whole bunch of the credit, but it's basically he who publishes gets the credit.
Oh
And
yeah,
then
and there was actually someone right before him who was about to publish, and he was like, "Nah, I'm gonna just publish
yeah,
now."
yeah, hmm
Have
yeah.
you considered? So have you considered getting one of those the Dracunculus rods with the nematode wrapped around the rod?
Oh no.
You should. I've been thinking about getting making
Mm.
a fake one,
Hmm.
because it's super fascinating. And I like parasites, so.
Can you put the description in the chat, please?
Sure. It's what they think led to the rod of
Uh,
Asclepius.
the rod of Aesculapius. Yeah,
Yeah,
gotcha.
yes.
Okay, the
They,
Dracunculus. Yes.
yeah. I want to like make a fake one
Hmm.
for but I mostly do the East Asian stuff,
Yeah.
so I don't know if I would actually have.
Oh, I am absolutely totally going to pillage and plunder your Google Drive.
Oh, go for it. And I'm sure I'm missing like so much. Because
Oh.
if I was a dragon, I would be a hoarder of research papers. So
Hmm.
I try to keep it up to date with all the stuff that I
Oh yeah.
hoard.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. And Min is absolutely so great meeting you. I love it.
Oh no, it's great meeting you. I think we almost met at Gulf Force this year, actually.
No, I've never been.
No, because I think there was someone who's supposed to be doing setting up surgery at last Gulf Wars, but Gulf
Hmm.
Wars was canceled.
Yeah, might have been. I started learning from Master Michael Graham up in the East Kingdom. Uh, if you if we ever make it to Penzance again, you definitely want to take his barber surgeon class. It's amazing.
Yeah, hopefully, maybe.
Hmm.
I'm probably the least optimistic out of everyone.
Yeah, I'm hoping that there's a vaccine because um,
We
I've
don't
been
have a history of
yeah,
having a vaccine for
right,
it,
right,
honestly.
because
And
yeah,
then
because right,
my
I
my partner made a good point. We have a difficulty getting people to take the flu vaccine. So,
mhm. Yeah, well,
Wow.
I'm figuring that those who get the shot and those who don't will pretty much be sorted out by Darwin.
oh well, that is
Because
one way to do it.
once the vaccine become, um, I'm seeing stuff that I get a I get a regular email. I subscribe to. Let me see if I can find it in my Gmail here. Oh, okay. My Wi-Fi my Wi-Fi package has been, or my Wi-Fi extender has been delivered. Um,
Oh, do you think you could post your website in the comments too?
oh yeah.
I may have missed it. I had to step away for a minute, but if you haven't read it, um, there's there's a new translation of the Tratula out.
Oh, okay. That I need to get my hands on.
Yeah, it was done by a historian named Monica Green. Did did the new translation? It's really good. And what's interesting about it, it was written in the 12th century in
Hmm.
Salerno.
Yeah.
And the, the person who did the translation says that it looks like it was actually like it, the Tratula, as it's come down to us, was basically three different books. The third of which was not written by the same person that wrote the gynecological stuff in the first two books.
Hmm.
But anyway, that continues to be like basically the definitive work on gynecology in Europe into the 16th century. And in fact, like the like first English, like there was a new, at the time, English translation that was done of it in like 1590 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's